This is the Arctic, a vast expanse of frozen tundra where ancient ice stretches for miles on end. Until a few years ago, exploring the Arctic meant relying on icebreakers, powerful vessels that use their reinforced hulls and specially designed bows to break through thick ice by crushing it under their weight. Traversing the region was hectic, but now as global warming melts the region and makes traveling through it easier and cheaper, a new war for the Arctic is brewing. One in which the richest countries of the world compete for resources worth trillions of dollars and flex their muscles in what is fast becoming a territorial pissing match. Russia has been expanding its footprint in the Arctic for years, building roads and military bases farther north than any of the other nations here. In 2022, Moscow released a new maritime doctrine, restating Russia's goal of being a great maritime power. The document identified what Russia considered major threats to its national security. These included the expansion of NATO military infrastructure to the borders of the Russian Federation and the United States and its allies' aspirations to limit Russia's access to the world ocean. In turn, NATO released its own long-winded strategic concept paper, calling Russia the most significant and direct threat to the Allies' security and to peace and stability in the Euro-Atlantic area. It claimed that Russia had increased its influence and control in the region through coercion, subversion, aggression, and annexation. Pretty big allegations if you think about it. Since then, tensions have only escalated. For one, Russia's prolonged war on Ukraine is making European countries really uncomfortable. So much so that Sweden, which had long positioned itself as a bastion of neutrality, decided it was time to finally join the NATO alliance. Previously, the country had stayed out of both world wars and even managed not to take sides during the Cold War. With Russia invading another European country, Sweden's assessment of the risk Putin posed changed dramatically.
It's a big change, I think, but at the same time we've always been allied in one way or another, so now it's official.
It's fun to be a part of it. It's fun to be a part of doing my part of NATO's defense of Europe.
Sweden is well prepared for being a NATO ally and for all of the responsibility that membership entails. We are ready. We are NATO. Thank you.
Sweden's accession in March 2024 had come after 2 prolonged years of negotiations, with NATO members like Turkey and Hungary only approving its application to join in exchange for favors that they'd wanted. The approval of sales for fighter jets, Sweden stamping down on Kurdistan Workers' Party inside its own borders, and support for Hungary in its disputes with the European Union. And while this horse trading was going on, the US decided it would join the fray as well. You see, the Arctic is regulated by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, finalized in 1982. The treaty says that the area that falls within the first 12 miles from a country's coast is part of its sovereign territory. Within the first 200 miles lies its exclusive economic zone. It's not technically part of the country's territorial waters, but they are allowed to fish there and drill for oil and gas. And beyond this zone lies the world ocean, the common heritage of all mankind, and the bone of contention in the Arctic. UNCLOS allows countries to extend their exclusive economic zone up to 350 miles on the continental shelf. But the extension only gives it resource rights limited to the seabed. That means they can't fish here, but they can drill and mine on the seafloor. But this extension isn't just handed over. Countries have to collect geological data suggesting that their continental shelves extend over this area, and have their evidence reviewed by independent experts before the UN approves it. And here's where the US has decided the rules don't really apply to it. In December last year, the US laid claim to 1 million square kilometers or 386,000 square miles of nautical territory here in the Beaufort Sea off an extension of Alaskan waters, even though it's not a signatory to UNCLOS. This is an area where Canada already has a competing claim. So, countries who have ratified the treaty, such as Russia, were understandably upset. And while the US defended itself by saying that the treaty lays out customary international law, critics say this is yet another example of American exceptionalism laid bare. They say that the country has long held the belief that it is unique and morally superior to other nations, and staking claims without ratifying treaties sort of reaffirms that view. More importantly, it's late to the party. Countries like Canada, Denmark, Norway, and Russia have been posturing in the Arctic for decades. In fact, of the 1.08 million square miles of the open ocean in the Arctic, only about 7,000 miles remain unclaimed. This is less than 1%. Back in 2007, a Russian mission with 2 mini submarines dove 4,300 meters below the icy Arctic Sea at the North Pole and planted a titanium Russian flag on the seabed. And although the international community feigned indifference and scoffed at the stunt, the incident set off an unprecedented rush to stake out claims in the Arctic. So, why are these countries so interested in the Arctic? Do its frigid waters really hold that much economic potential? The short answer is yes. The Arctic might contain 130 billion barrels of oil and 30% of the world's natural gas. And it has large deposits of other expensive minerals on the seabed too. The area where the US is laying its claim, the Beaufort Sea, has significant oil and gas reserves as well. But even more importantly, the melting of the Arctic has opened up a new sea route for trade, which is much shorter and faster. The traditional Suez Canal route from eastern Russia and Asia to Europe is 8,000 kilometers longer than the Northern Sea route, which passes through the Arctic. The Arctic route also cuts down shipping time by 2 weeks, and although it's not navigable all year round because of the weather, it's still a pretty massive game changer. And finally, the Arctic's location has serious geopolitical importance. The bases that Russia has been furiously building have already been used in its war against Ukraine. In early July this year, the Ukrainian Air Force reported that 5 Tupolev Tu-95 MS planes, more commonly known as Bear-H in NATO countries, had taken off from one of Russia's Arctic bases, the Olenia airfield in the Murmansk region. A few hours later, in broad daylight on July 9th, the Okhmatdyt Children's Hospital in Ukraine was bombed. There were no other bombers in the area capable of doing this kind of damage. Ukraine responded in kind. Later that month, on the 27th, the Ukrainian paper Pravda reported that Ukraine's drones had struck a long-range supersonic bomber missile carrier at Olenia, just 93 miles from Finland and 124 miles from Norway. Ukraine has also made inroads into Russian Kursk territory this month, the first time another country has gained territory inside the state since the Second World War. So, Russia's bases in the Arctic are not just for show. The region is heating up, both literally and figuratively, and as it does, the world's biggest powers are beginning to shake their fists and flex their muscles. For years, countries around the Arctic have cooperated with each other under the guise of Arctic exceptionalism, the idea that this region must remain a zone of peace. This was rooted in the concept of the Arctic Sublime, meaning that while the region was beautiful, it was also downright terrifying, and humans needed to collaborate in order to survive it. These collaborations have already been scaled down in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war, and if countries in the north continue on this path of non-diplomacy, peace in the Arctic may be shattered for good. Stay tuned for our next episode, in which we discuss how this race for resources will affect the Arctic region's climate and wildlife populations.